Welcome to the Growth Whispers podcast, where everything we talk about is building enduring great companies. Not just great companies, not just enduring companies, enduring great ones, which means they're around for decades and continue to thrive. Ideally from leadership team to leadership team, maybe even generation to generation. That's something we're passionate about. I'm Kevin Lawrence. I'm here today, as always, with my co-host, Brad Giles. Brad, hello, and how are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Kevin. Very well. Had a very good weekend in our Southwest, and looking forward to an interesting topic today.
Yes, me too. Yeah, I was down in Palm Springs last week working with a company I've been working with for a decade. 40 annual and quarterly meetings later, and they're just like, we're laughing as we're reviewing the results because it's just incredible how well they're doing. Huge percentage of A players and results that follow. It's incredible. Anyway, so let's get right into, we got a really great show today. We're talking about the annual strategic thinking meeting, resetting the whole thing, which is what we were doing in Palm Springs last week. Over the last, we did over 4 days, but 3 days of working. So, but to kick it off, what's the word of the day, Brad? What's your word of the day?
One is discipline. So I've been watching this Beatles documentary, and it's about really the last recording session of the Beatles, and not long before, a few months, I think, before their manager, Brian Epstein, had passed away, tragically. And what they were saying is that we've lost the discipline that where we've got someone who tells us what to do and not to do and to keep us organized. And they were self-reflecting on that in the way that a coach does, in the way, in the way that a coach does. And through that lens, I was really thinking about how they knew that they were struggling because they'd lost that central point of discipline that was external to the band, and as you may know, only a matter of months later, the Beatles had split up. So discipline, what's your word?
Mine is festive. We're coming into the festive season here, and, for those that celebrate Christmas and whatever the kind of faith that people have, and just, spending some time with my family, just thinking about how, there's different seasons where, and the Christmas or festive season is one, but where it brings a whole bunch of joy to it. People decorate their homes, they think about bringing and having special gatherings, and just how that kind of puts some sparkle on life and makes things a little more exciting, more time connecting, and just how they're great traditions that bring people together.
Yeah, life would be nowhere near the same without them, that's for sure.
Right.
So another great tradition is the annual strategic thinking meeting. But before we do that, I want to hear you try to stitch together discipline and festive.
Yeah, it's festive discipline. It's like it's the joy of discipline, Brad. You got joy and fun and bringing people together, and then you got discipline. And it takes good discipline to have great gatherings of people. You got to plan and get organized. So discipline and festive discipline. All right. So yeah, strategic plan, the annual, and I'm just fresh off one in Palm Springs, and it's one of the most important times of the year for a company. Just as holiday gatherings are one of the most important times of year for some families, but for a company, it's everyone comes together and has time to step out of the business and zoom out from perspective to really, quote, get on the business and think about it in a way before they drop back into execution mode. So it's incredibly impactful, and is, one of the key things that we were talking about as we're preparing for the show today is that, it's at least 2, often 3 days that some people will spend 4 or 5, but you got to spend a few days so you're not rushed, so you have time to really contemplate and reflect.
Yeah, it really sets the basis for all of the other meetings. So what we're going to be doing over the next 5 episodes is a series about the meeting rhythm. So today, obviously, we're talking about the strategic thinking meeting. Then next week, we're talking about the quarterly execution planning meeting. And then we're talking about the monthly leadership team meeting. And then the week after that, the weekly meeting, and then the week after that, the daily huddle. So really, through these 5 episodes, you'll get a bit of an understanding of the meeting rhythm in its whole. And why does the meeting rhythm matter, Kevin?
Well, it's because it keeps us focused and aligned. It also keeps us accountable. When we get into the day job, we get caught up in everything that's going on, often in short-term issues. And this meeting rhythm reconnects us to what's most important. It connects us to our major goals that march us forward to be the company we want to be, versus the daily drama that we can get lost in.
Yeah. So we've done another episode kind of connected to the annual strategic thinking the annual strategic thinking meeting. Thank you. And that's episode 85, how to get the most from a strategic planning framework. So you can certainly have a look at that as a reference point. But as you said, it's really a 2-day meeting. Some companies have a 3-day, some companies have a bit more, but you need enough time to build a strategy that you'll be confident for the next 4 quarters, essentially, until the next strategic meeting. That depends on the size of your company and how dynamic the market is, I suppose. But a best practice could be 2, maybe 3 days. You agree?
Exactly. And ideally, and for a lot of the companies that we work with, depending on how the year is going, might depict the place that we have the meeting. So the company that I was just with, they're US based. And often we would go and have our meeting in Mexico or somewhere else. In the US, it's a nice place to get away to. Clients I work with in India, we've done them in many different locations all around the world. They interestingly tie it into doing tours of similar companies like theirs to do a bit of learning and relationship building with similar types of businesses in whatever city they go to. So we go to better locations when the business is having a better year, but no matter what, it's getting off site together for those 2, 3, 4 days. And as we roll forward, as some teams are more virtual more often, this meeting becomes more important because of the bonding and alignment that happens.
Yeah. So you touched on a really important point there, which is best practice is to have it offsite, not to have it in the company meeting room.
Oh gosh, no.
But some people think that way. We've got a meeting room.
Why is that a horrible idea, Brad? Why is it horrible to have it in your own company meeting room, especially for the annual? You could argue for the quarter, but why is particular for the annual?
I think psychology, it tells you it's important, number one. It tells you it has a different level of importance than other meetings. But number two, you're not distracted. So you can't walk out to the bathroom in a break and get accosted by someone else in the firm who's going to ask you 10 or 20 different questions that are going to take your mind off. So this is really about deep work. Getting offsite, thinking deeply. It is.
And a great way to put it. And the other piece is, ideally, in a perfect scenario, some of the best ones is you're staying together in the same house. So for example, the one we just did in Palm Springs, which was much like our team one that we did in Whistler in September or October, sorry. But in this house, so we have actually we rented 2 houses next door because there were 10 of us and we want everyone to have their own room. But we had a massive workplace, and there's also a pool and a hot tub and places to play games and all of these things. There's room for breakouts all over the place if you find the right house. But we had a chef who would come in and cook breakfast and lunch for us. We were going out for dinner, I think, all the nights except for one. But it gave us an amazing foundation. But we had time together in the morning, and you're eating together and you're hanging out at night. All these activities really help to bond you, which is different than a hotel room, because when the meeting's over, people go back and do their email, talk to their family, and do all those other things. And it's not that you shouldn't talk to your family, that's great. But the idea is you're together for 48, 72, 96 hours, whatever it happens to be. And there's major spillover benefits you get from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So somebody I know owns a retreat center that you could do that in. Is that true, Brad?
That's true. Yeah. We've got a retreat center here in Western Australia called Heartbeat Retreat. And it's, it's perfect for that kind of thing. Let's step out of the adverts. Yeah, well, that's why we got it, because we've got so many teams and we know how hard it is to get a really amazing place to go away for retreats.
Yes.
And so let's go in. So we've got really 7 items that you have to cover over, or key important items about the annual strategic thinking meeting. So first of all, why does it matter? Why does it matter to have a annual strategic thinking meeting? It answers the question, what is our strategy? So there's no other meeting in the calendar where we're purely dedicated to evolving, understanding, and deciding our strategy. And remember that a good strategy tells us what to say no to. So then when we spin off into the 90-day quarterly execution planning meetings, we know what to say no to, where we understand because we've set that at the annual.
Yeah, 100%. It's not complex, but you need to have the time to be able to do that. The rest of the meetings, you're very much in execution mode. This is the time when you zoom out, contemplate, think about different things. So at this meeting in Palm Springs, we're talking about, well, what do we want the business to look like in 2030, which is, 8 calendar years down the road, or no, not 9 years down the road. And we had time to talk about that. We had time just to sit and really wonder, what could that be like? What would it not be like? And again, normally the other meetings, you don't have time to think about that. Yeah. So that's critical. So whatever. The second major thing is reviewing the previous year, a full review. And we're looking at the review of the financials. Obvious, but sometimes people don't put enough energy into that. But and with insight of what's working, what's not working, what do we have to do differently? Reviewing of the people, looking through the key people in the team. Who are the high performers? Who are the low performers? Who shouldn't be in the company? And how are we going to do that? How are we going to grow and develop the team? And then what are the gaps, the key people we have to hire? And then the strategy review of all the execution plans that we had. Yeah. And really deep. And then also taking a look at the culture. How's the culture of the business? So it's a real time to dress down the business and see what's working, what's not. How do we do it better? Because aside from being accountable to what we had committed, the rest of the meeting is about do it better next year, because we're resetting that next plan.
Yeah, that's an important point. There is a transition, and I've actually got a slide when I get to this point, which is a large photo of a button and it says reset. So we go through the annual performance, all of the kind of things that you've discussed, what worked, what didn't, did we achieve our priorities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And did we achieve our priorities for the past quarter? And then there comes a point, it's like, now we've pressed the reset button, whatever's happened has happened. Now it's time to move forward. Let's get stuck into it. And that really takes us to the next point, which is starting at the top of the mountain and talking about how are we performing on our core ideologies, and initially, obviously, our big, hairy, audacious goal. How are we working with our big, hairy, audacious goal? Is it performing? And so we've got an episode on this, episode 87, which is the 5 main BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal mistakes that you may want to reference for that. But yeah, we begin with the BHAG and the core values and the core purpose. How are they working in the company? Are they still right? Where are the errors? Those types of things.
Yeah, and often, and everyone looks at different strategic tools to help them look at their business, and then we get into a bunch of these tools. And lots of the companies we work with take, especially the ones that have been with us to spend time with Jim Collins and his lab, they will also take a look and review the validity of the hedgehog, and the validity of their flywheel, and the health of their flywheel, and what needs to happen next. Now, it also, some of this falls into our next point as well. But taking a look at these things that you're using to define and strengthen your company, and just checking in on them, what's the health of them, and what might we need to do different.
Yeah. And there is not really any other time in the year when you might have this as an agenda item. So We then move on to a strategic analysis of the external and internal environment. Again, many tools that you could use for this, but we've got to assess what's changing in the market, what is the technology that could impact us, the societal changes. If we're not doing this at least annually, there could be things that could arise that we're not going to be aware of, and we could act too late. So dedicating time to looking inside and outside the firm as an analysis.
Right. And so for an example, some of the tools that we might look at is you might look at a SWOT, or a strengths, weaknesses, and trends. There's Porter's 5 forces, other tools that have you be able to reflect on this in a structured way.
Indeed. And then once we understand that, we can move on to the next point, which is, how will you be different? Michael Porter's got some great tools on this that we've covered off before. How will you be different in the market? How will you avoid commoditization? And so trying to understand in your firm what's worked, what hasn't, and applying some tools to the thinking that is differentiation in the market in which you play.
Yeah, and this is, we've done another episode on this, but it's also differentiation in your whole value chain versus just in your marketing and how you're communicating. And it's the core differentiation in the value chain that makes you very, very competitive. And a marketing differentiation is good. It's just not as impactful and sustainable or enduring as the core model differentiation.
Shout out to our marketing friends who do a great job, but marketing is designed to only focus on the customer side of the equation, whereas strategy focuses on the entire value chain.
Yeah.
And I imagine the blank looks on the marketing team's faces when I say that, because I've said it and had those blank looks before.
Yes. Yeah, and one is it's almost differentiation through business model versus a differentiation through positioning and how you're communicating with customers. So, excellent.
And then finally, we work based on that differentiation, we move to decide what are the company goals, the top 3 to 5 priorities for the whole company, and how we're going to be different in the 3-year period. And then what are the company priorities for the 1-year period, so that we know that the whole team is aligned around what we need to focus on. So really, we're walking backwards down that big, hairy, audacious goal mountain, going from the 10 to 30-year goal to the 3-year. We understand what happens at the 3-year, and then the 1-year, and then finally, we move on to a 90-day execution plan.
Yeah, and before we get down there, the key thing is as you review these different models of your BHAG, your core ideologies, things like your flywheel, your 5 forces, your differentiation or your positioning in the market. When you review all of these things, as you're reviewing them and calibrating them, you start to get clearer on what the most important things you need to do. And that's this piece that you just talked about. It's number 6, Brad, about the company goals for the 3-year and the 1-year, is that if you just go pick those goals, you're going to pick them logically and linearly. But without that, when you have that context, you think about it notably differently and generally more strategically, because you're seeing gaps versus, well, we just need to logically march ahead if you don't do it. And that's why we got to spend the time on that stuff up front.
I was speaking with a leadership team only 3 days ago about why we set goals starting at the end goal and working backwards, rather than the logic, as you said, which is starting today and thinking, well, knowing what I know about today, this is where I want to be in 90 days. And then if I execute that, this is where I want to be in 1 year. And then if I execute that, this is where I want to be in 3 to 5 years. It's so much more valuable starting with the end in mind and walking backwards.
Yeah, because you get creative and you end up building bigger gaps and more tension into the thinking. And that tension makes you creative, and you find ways to move faster or differently that you wouldn't in your logical march. So yes, that's starting with the end in mind, getting really clear, and then letting the tension drive creativity. So company goals for 3 years and 1 year, really, really critical. And again, when we do a flywheel review. And one of the things we talk about is that, you know, each of your 3-year goals, it has to help speed up the flywheel. And if it doesn't, you should be saying no to it. 90-day execution plans is fun. That's where the rubber hits the road. We have a rule of thumb that we use is we can't leave any quarterly or annual meeting without those 90-day plans really clear. Never. Otherwise, you could forget everything else. And when you're getting started, you have to have them because it's what you use to go and implement and learn each time you do it. One interesting things about those 90-day execution plans is also making sure that they're smart goals. And, you know, and again, the company I was just with, we have very, very clear outcomes on every goal. We have a system and it's built into the company DNA now that you can't have a goal without a clear outcome. But that's hard for people to do. People will say, yeah, we're going to improve the sales process. Okay. To what end? Well, so that it's better. We're going to get a higher closing rate. Awesome. What's your closing rate going to be? Okay. How much business are you going to close? And getting down into tangible. Okay. We're going to sign 14 contracts of at least $500,000 each with at least a 35% gross margin. Okay. Excellent. That's very different than improve the sales process. And you know what happened? That's a whole thing around setting these goals. That's another topic. But the point is clear, tangible goals that produce the outcomes for the business. Now, ideally, on these 90-day plans, there's 2 sets. There's one for the company, and then each executive in the room has their own mini plan for them and their team. And for the CEOs in the room, that's how you can have real clear accountabilities for your execs. And you can truly see how they're producing versus expectations versus just what the financial statements say or how you feel. How do they get their team to rally and deliver those specifics?
Yeah, so we've done an episode on this, episode 71, how to use SMART goals with your team.
Yep.
And you can go back if you so desire and take a look at that and see what's the best practice around those SMART goals and why do they matter.
Yep, they sure do. So
very good.
At the end, we got a 90-day plan for the company and for each executive in the room. If you're really advanced, those would scale all the way down to business, but that takes some time to get there. So why don't we remove again? We're talking about the annual strategic thinking meeting. So, you know, we'll go through real quick. One, why it matters, because it clarifies our strategy. It gets the team aligned and locked and loaded for the next year. Second one is we do the previous year review so we get the best learning and how we can do better. By the way, my favorite question is, okay, great. How would you rate your performance last year? And what are you going to do to take it up a notch this year, right? Constantly improving our own performance. Confirm the BHAG, core ideologies. You might even get into the flywheel and other things as well. Number 4, strategic analysis, internal and external, just looking at what's going on and what's changing. Brad, you want to cover the rest there?
And then we move on to the differentiators. How will you be different in the market? If you're not different, you're becoming a commodity. And then once we understand how we will be different, transitioning that into the 3-year company priorities or goals or differentiators, and then the 1 year. So getting real clarity, a deeper understanding, and then moving on to the 90-day execution plan. And so that's coming out of an annual strategic thinking meeting. The team should be really aligned and they should understand where we're going as a business. And then, as you said, they should be taking that alignment back to all of their teams. And there should be a communication piece that happens after that. All right, good chat today, Kevin. Very, very good chat. We're talking about the episode 90, the annual strategic thinking meeting. As always, we will move to close. Let's just mention YouTube. So we have a YouTube channel. You can watch the videos on there, obviously, or through our podcast. And each of us have a newsletter as well that you may wish to subscribe to. We produce weekly content. So good chat today, Kev. And let's look forward to having a chat again next week with everyone about the quarterly execution planning meeting. Have yourself a good week.